we're looking at leaping into action, and it's a joint presentation with our own organization, EWT, KZN Wildlife as a partner, and the Amphibian Ark. So, my talk is going to be divided into a few sections. I'll look at an introduction to the amphibian crisis, although you'll be able to answer me on those ones. The role of ex situ facilities. What does ex situ mean?
Species in other areas than their natural environment.
Okay, so here we're looking particularly at species that are not in their natural environment. In situ meaning those that are in their natural environment. We'll focus a little bit on KwaZulu-Natal, and then we'll look at our partnership. So, which continent are frogs not found on so far? Antarctica. Great. Okay, so they've even been found as far as the Arctic Circle. So they've been found north, but we so far haven't found any. So here we go. Louis, there's a whole new area of research. There could be some down there.
Some cool ones.
Some cool ones, yes. Righto. Okay, we've looked at some of the species of frogs. What percentage of frogs are endangered in the world? Okay, let's have a look. Let's firstly have a look at why amphibians are important before we go on to that. They're indicators of environmental health. We've looked at that before. Control of invertebrate pests. What we always say at Ushaka SeaWorld is, do you like mosquitoes? Okay, except for Adrian, most people say no. And that's why we say, make sure you've got frogs. They're an important link in the food web. We've had that explained, important role in nutrient cycles. And somebody mentioned they're an important source of human medicine. In fact, this little guy here, there appears to be a compound on his skin that they're using to test if it can help to prevent the transmission of the HIV virus. So there are uses for these frogs that we haven't even thought of yet. Important role in many cultures. Has anyone ever thought of Kermit? What Kermit has done for frog conservation. And then also they are simply beautiful. They have an existence value. So, unfortunately, as we've heard, that's what's happening to frogs around the world. We're losing them. So, depending on which assessment you look at and when, 42% in decline, 32% threatened, 165 presumed extinct, that was the last I heard, and 23% are data deficient. So, as we've all heard, frogs have got a problem. Okay, their situation is more dire than those fluffy things or those feathery things that we spend so much time on. So go frogs, they need us. For every threatened bird or mammal, there are 2 to 3 amphibians nearing extinction. Okay, so when people say, why care about frogs, that's why we care. Why are they disappearing? We've been through this before. Habitat loss affects more species than any other threat. The chytrid fungus. Where is the chytrid fungus most prominent? Where are we seeing the impacts of the chytrid fungus?
Central America.
Central America. There's some amazing graphs where you can actually see the movement of this chytrid fungus through populations, and you can see different species going extinct as the chytrid fungus moves. Climate change, pollution and pesticides, introduced species, and overcollection for food and pets in some areas. So, how have the world responded to this? Because we focused a lot on South Africa. How's the world responding? In 2005, around then, Conservation International and the IUCN, which are the big bodies that look after conservation in the world, convened an Amphibian Conservation Summit. Suddenly they were saying, okay, we've got a problem with amphibians. What are we going to do about it? They developed an action plan, and they put together the amphibian specialist group to carry out that plan. So they put together a plan. They said, look, we're losing these species. We need to do something. The highest priority was in situ conservation. Okay, that's the most important thing. Looking after the habitats that these animals live in. If we can't look after the habitats, nothing else is going to work. But they also realized that sometimes traditional in situ conservation is not going to be fast enough. You're losing species at a rate that in situ conservation can't keep up with. So they said, right, we need to do something. We need to work out how can we help these animals while we let in situ conservation carry on. And out of this came something called the Amphibian Ark. You can see on the bottom right-hand side, that is the Ark. That is basically giving us an idea of buying time to look after different species while the in situ conservation work happens. And this is where the ex situ response comes in. This is where zoos and aquariums can play a role. Rapid response rescues. These have been initiated in Central America in many cases, where there are 5 or 6 or 10 of a particular species left. So they've been involved in rapid response rescues. Captive assurance colonies, breeding up those captive assurance colonies in the hope that they'll be able to be reintroduced down the line. Providing animals for release and for research. A lot of what we know about frogs today comes from captive animal facilities who are developing the husbandry plans, how to look after these animals better. Developing recovery plans together with the in situ conservation community. Conservation education, really, really important. I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. Capacity building, learning how to handle animals, learning how to breed animals, learning how to care for the animals. It's all part of the research. And then fundraising, raising awareness of these animals so that we can do more in the in situ field. Right, this brings us on to the KwaZulu-Natal situation. Right here we have, and I don't have to tell you anything about this particular little guy. He is? Right, okay. Well, if anyone recognizes one frog, it's going to be the Pickersgill after this conference. So, in 2008, Johannesburg Zoo were actually forerunners in this, and they initiated an Amphibian Ark prioritization workshop. They said, worldwide, there's a problem with amphibians. What's happening in South Africa? Let's look at what's happening in our own country and see if we can prioritize the species that need some sort of intervention to help them. So, and here I have to give credit to Ian Visser. He was one of the leaders in this field. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but I think the fact that this process is carrying on is a tribute to his energy and enthusiasm for frogs. In 2010, the African Preservation Program, under the auspices of PAZA, which is what PAZAB used to be until they lost the Botanical Gardens. Now they're the Pan-African Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Sorry, obviously you do need botanical gardens, though, from all the research we've heard. And they put together a program that said, how are we going to look after this particular species? What contribution can we, as a captive animal facility, help? How can we help to look after, contribute to this particular species? 2013, Jean and Adrian and the people put together the Biodiversity Management Plan workshop, which had, I think you had 40 different people, 40 different companies, institutes, bodies represented, which was a fantastic start to the Biodiversity Management Plan which has been produced. And I'm pretty sure that you all have a picture, you all have a copy of that. So, just looking at the focus that we've got Johannesburg and National Zoo involved. What are we doing here in KZN? You can see this is where Pickersgills like to live, and we've looked at that in quite a lot of detail. Why are we involved? We're an aquarium. It's because we have an exciting exhibit called Dangerous Creatures, and that's where we have our frogs are on exhibit to our visitors. So the in situ work has been done primarily by KZN Wildlife and the EWT, and together with Joburg Zoo and the National Zoo, we're looking at the ex situ work. Jean very wisely recognized that because these animals tend to live in KZN and only KZN on the coast, we would be a very good partner to have with Joburg Zoo and National Zoo. This is the first collecting trip that went out to collect some frogs. We spent quite a lot of time putting together just some of the basics that are needed to look after the frogs. This is just one of the areas that we have at Rushaka SeaWorld. And we brought back 2 frogs from the first collecting trip. And here you can see some of the setup that we've got in order to try and breed these frogs. We were very lucky that our 2 frogs happened to be just right, and the timing was impeccable because that night they laid a lot of eggs. We ended up with just over 200 eggs. And then remember, this is trial and error. We're learning how to look after these animals. We're learning how to breed them. We tried all sorts of different types of substrate, which would the little tadpoles like the best. Really important here is the research and record keeping, making sure that we understand what the species needs. So this is a really important component when you're doing any form of breeding. And we landed up with 25 froglets. which was a great success and something that we were very excited about. Unfortunately, after months and months of effort putting everything together, getting them to breed, the team came in and found that one morning the misting system had failed and our froglets had died. The team were devastated because this is something that they were putting so much heart and soul into. But we've learned a lot of lessons. Where do we go from here? And this is what we really need to look at. We know that we can breed them. What happens if we do breed them? Are we ready to release them? What is the process from here? What have we learnt? We can play a role in temporary housing. We can assist in breeding for release. Head start or adults. Do we put out tadpoles if we did it? Research on husbandry and education. But there's a lot that needs to happen before we even start thinking about moving frogs into a new environment. We need to sort out the genetics, and the National Zoo are doing that. Translocation guidelines. You can't just pick up frogs here and move them to the next spot. A husbandry manual, we're looking at that. How do we make sure that we don't have any equipment failures? How do we make sure that what we learn gets transmitted to other facilities? Biosecurity, another important thing. Identification of in situ sites that may be suitable. And then permits. How do we make sure we fit within the right legislative framework? Now, in addition to that, which is looking at the more research, physical animal side of things, we also have a very important role with our frog exhibit to teach people to care and to excite people about frogs. Many people, as you all know, when you hear about frogs, say, yuck. Our job is to make frogs really, really exciting, inspiring, even sexy if we can. So here you can see we've got our artwork and we've got indigenous frogs. We want you to love your locals. It's all very well looking at pictures of exotic frogs. We've got amazing frogs here in KZN. Love your locals. We also have our special days where we hop for hope, and this is looking at frogs for just the general public. So people who don't visit us, just walking past the general public, and we hand out things like, thank you very much, we hand out things like bookmarks, all to try and excite people about frogs, get them interested in frogs, understanding why frogs are important. And here you can see this young girl is having her first opportunity to touch a bullfrog. If you look at her face, it tells you what most people think about frogs. It's wonderful to see that after this, she really fell in love. So, I wanted to see what are we really achieving with bringing people in to see frogs. So we've done some very limited research, and we've just started looking at this. We wanted to know why people visited our exhibit. And the number one reason out of 1 to 7 was it's fun and educational. So people are coming in to dangerous creatures wanting to learn and have fun. People came in thinking that frogs were reptiles. How many of you think frogs are reptiles? Okay, we did have some people who think that frogs are reptiles before, but after they hopefully had learned something, although not too much if we look at that particular one. So we need to look at our messaging. Some snake populations are threatened. People were learning about that. Habitat destruction is a problem for snakes. People were learning about that. We've got a problem. Snakes make good pets. That helped us to change our messaging in dangerous creatures because that's not a message we want people to get. Snakes are good for pest control and increase there. And then, interestingly, snakes are frightening and dangerous animals. We noticed a decrease in that after their visit. So we are helping people to learn a little bit about snakes and frogs. The exhibit helped me to change my mind about snakes and frogs. You'll see that most people agree or strongly agree that the exhibit helped them to change their mind about frogs. So we're starting to help teach people that frogs are important in our ecosystems and that they have a valuable role to play. I'm not going to go through that, I'm running out of time. So what is our other role? We've looked at our role from the physical point of view. We can play a role in awareness for care, not just awareness for awareness. Myth busting. Many of our visitors come in with lots of myths about frogs. Whether it's kissing a frog and getting a prince, which I've tried a lot, it hasn't worked, or it's got to do with warts and things like that. We need to work on that. Fundraising, encouraging that citizen science that we've been hearing about, and then really importantly, evaluating our impact. We can't just say we're teaching people, we need to evaluate it. So, the frog says, please help me, please save me. And I'd like to just end off with saying a very quick thank you to Jean, Carl, Nick, and Leslie. And hopefully, if we succeed, we can eventually all love frogs as much as Noktula loves our frogs. Thank you very much.